Horned helmets, fire-breathing beasts, and scrappy underdog Vikings. Sounds like the stuff of legends, doesn't it?
Legends tell of ships that sailed too close to it, only to drop off the edge of the world.
But legends have a way of evolving, and what DreamWorks did with How to Train Your Dragon is nothing short of alchemy. So grab a drink, traveler, settle in, and allow me to tell you the tale of two dragons named Toothless. But before we get there, let's start with some of the aesthetics. I like to begin with the horns. And believe it or not, real Vikings did not wear helmets like this. Sure, it's iconic, everybody knows the horned Viking helm, but the reality is it's pure fantasy. It was popularized in 19th century operas, starting with Wagner, who was the same man who convinced the populace that Valkyries had wings. Yet, somehow, the horned helm became shorthand for Vikings in the popular imagination. DreamWorks knew this when they took on the How to Train Your Dragon project, and they leaned into it with a fury, creating a world that feels both whimsical and familiar at the same time.
I brought you something to keep you safe in the ring.
Thanks.
Your mother would have wanted you to have it. It's half of her breastplate.
Just take a look at Burke. The coastal setting, the wooden structures, the dragon motifs, they pulled from very real Norse culture. But they added in their own twist. They leaned into the stereotypes, the pop culture of it all, that has been developing over the course of the last several hundred years. And it becomes a place where all of these things collide into a fantastical world. I mean, every house in this little coastal village on a cliff looks like it could withstand the heaviest of storms or just about any sort of dragon raid that might come in looking to steal sheep and children.
But wasn't that the whole point? It's not a history lesson after all.
That's a fair point. But here's the thing. Those operatic Viking stereotypes, they're a part of what makes the story sing. They weren't just leaning on these tropes, they were using them to create a broader world that feels familiar. Something that appears both larger than life as well as being very grounded. It's a sort of balance where you might laugh at the ridiculousness of the gigantic horns on their head, but also it feels sort of grounded, it feels normal. And that, traveler, takes a very special kind of craft. And what about the dragons in this story? You see, dragons have always been an important part of storytelling and mythos from all over the world. And in Western mythologies, they have loomed large for centuries. In Norse legend, you had Fafnir, who was a dwarf. Greed struck his heart and turned him into a slithering serpent. And then you have Beowulf, where the fire-breathing beast became his final challenge in his hero's journey. Dragons have always been this symbol of power and greed and untamed chaos. But How to Train Your Dragon flipped the narrative a little bit. Here, dragons aren't just monsters to be feared, they are creatures that are misunderstood. They're undeniably wild, but not necessarily malevolent. And that shift really changes everything. Instead of a fight, it's more about finding harmony, seeing the world through a different lens. It's a lesson of coexistence, one that feels very timely in the tumultuous era we live in now. It's like taming a storm instead of running from it. And let's not forget about the inspiration for all of these things. The books were originally written by a woman named Cressida Caldwell. And if you've never read them, they are absolutely a delightful romp. Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III isn't your typical barbaric Viking. No, he's more of an underdog, a meek sort of individual. He's scrawny and clever and more likely to talk his way out of a problem than fight his way out. And Toothless, he was completely different in the books. He was this little green pest who flew around and bothered Hiccup all the time, and then, of course, in the films, he was replaced by a larger, beautiful, glossy black dragon. And DreamWorks did keep the heart of the books. The underdog, the unlikely friendship, all of these things remained. But they added layers to it. They raised the stakes. The dragons grew more majestic, and those flying scenes are some of the best animation I have seen in years. I would go so far as to call it pure cinema magic. It's like they took Miss Cowell's quirky story and then they taught it to Saw. You see, in the overall, Burke's World is a love letter to Viking culture, seen through a sort of funhouse mirror. And I know I will get people who say Vikings were not an ethnic group, Vikings didn't have a culture. We're having fun. Stop ruining it for everyone. The longships, the hardy feast, the dragon-riding warriors. It's all there, it's turned up to an 11. And the dragons, well, they're this beautiful patchwork of Western mythology that surrounded dragons throughout all of European history. With a little bit of invention, of course. And Toothless is actually a fine example of how they took something that is majestic and mystical and strange and made it familiar. As a Night Fury, he's pure power, but then his mannerisms are quite literally based off of those of pet dogs and cats.
So they're less like monsters and more like pets?
Not quite. They're more like companions in adventure. It's a relationship that is built on trust. And that's really what makes it resonate with people. And that's really why it all works so well. It's not just about dragons or Viking stereotypes. It is about that connection. Hiccup and Toothless show us that trust can overcome fear. And that understanding can bridge even the widest gaps. You trust me to tell you a story, and because of that you do not fear spending your time here in the tavern with me. And I trust you to carry my stories out into the world. Because if you sat here through this entire thing, I would doubt it's for any reason other than you have love for the tales. And this particular story, it's about seeing the world and ourselves differently. So friends, raise your glass to Hiccup, Toothless, and the power of transformation. The courage to see the world with new eyes. And the strength to build bonds where others see fear. Until next time, traveler, stay bloodthirsty, and may your own skies always be clear. I'll see you next time.